So as we mentioned earlier, this is day one of the new NFL free agent window. And joining us right now is Doug Eldridge. He's the founder of Achilles PR. Joining us from the Washington, D.C. area, also seen often on Fox Business talking about sports issues. Doug, great to see you. Welcome to Sports IQ. Let's jump right into it right now. First off, explain that this is the first official day. We've heard all of these different moves of guys being cut and new contracts being signed, or this guy's going here. But none of it's official until this afternoon, correct?
That's right. So today at 4 p.m. is the official start of the new league year. So all of these contracts that are been reported as being done, it might be done in principle, but they're not filed, right? So today at 4 Eastern time is the start of the new league year, and all of those contracts that have been negotiated will be formally signed and registered. And it has been a blockbuster couple of days, right? You saw Josh Allen sign the biggest contract in NFL history, a 6-year, $330 million deal with $250 million guaranteed. Just before that, Myles Garrett signed the largest contract for a non-quarterback in NFL history, $123 million, as they say, from Cleveland to Canton. I'm glad he's going to stay there. I think that's good for him, but I think it's great for Cleveland. But right here in the DC area, as you mentioned, the two big stories are the Commanders. I always want to slip and say Redskins, old
Right.
habits die hard, but they're letting go of Jonathan Allen. He's going to be able to hit the free agent market. Again, that was a first round pick out of Alabama. He and Deron Payne have been the center of this offensive line. And just up the road in Baltimore, Ronnie Stanley, that starting left tackle, the anchor of that Baltimore offensive line. It's questionable why Lamar didn't win the MVP. Derrick Henry at 30 years old runs for an absurd number of yards. They only do that with a solid offensive line. So once again, Baltimore front office from Ozzie to Eric, brilliant moves across the board. But speaking of the board, there are so many pieces in play right now, right? You often see two things that happen. One, free agents get napped up like that. And then you see big names that wait and don't get signed until later in the summer. And I've even had clients that really didn't get signed until the end of training camp. And it is a numbers game. And I always liken it to remember the old Tetris game? How the pieces would come down the board and you try to fit them into place. And the
Right.
deeper you go in the game, it goes faster and faster. Well, by way of analogy, it's kind of the same thing that we see with free agency. In the beginning, the pieces move easy because it's slower. As you get deeper into the game and closer into or proximity to the regular season, they start moving a lot faster. But this is the biggest business window for the NFL. We just wrapped the combine, and in about 5 weeks from now, we have the draft. So it's a busy season.
Yeah, and I think this is where it's like a market correction. Like, if you only have so many dollars to spend, let's say you go to the grocery store and you only $100 and you look down and realize that you still need two more things that you really have to have. So what do you take out of your cart to make room for that? And a much larger with a lot more zeros involved, that's what we're seeing here. I mean, you see Von Miller being released the same day that Allen signs his deal in Buffalo, a small market, which again goes to the power of the NFL, that a small market team can afford that kind of money. That's how the NFL is so different from other leagues.
That's so true. I was explaining to somebody the other day, and I said it's like going shopping with a credit card versus a debit card, right?
Yeah.
Debit, when you hit your limit, you can't pay for it. And
Yeah.
so too is the case with that hard salary cap in the NFL. There is a literal ceiling. It's not like baseball where they can pay tax overages. I mean, you only have so many beans to count in the beginning and the end of the day. And you have to be smart with your money.
Yeah, exactly. What are some other big moves that you anticipate coming that you've maybe have heard about? Or obviously, Devontae Adams to the Rams. We talked about Josh Allen. The Chiefs right now, there's somebody that kind of began this massive quarterback contract thing, the Mahomes, a couple of years ago. And all of a sudden, they're no longer invincible. Like they kind of skated along, found a way to eke out wins through the season until finally they ran out of gas. What changes do you foresee coming in Kansas City?
I think you have to view it in context. That looked like a very different Chiefs team. They were flat. They were allowing huge holes on defense. They were never clicking on offense. That game was not remotely as close as the final score indicated, and it wasn't even close in the box score.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you always need new weapons. I think the biggest problem for the Chiefs is kind of twofold. Number one, heavy is the head that wears the crown, the burden of being winners. Along with that, you have players that age out or leave with free agency. But they've also had, they might be winning in the regular season or in the postseason, but they've been consistently losing in the offseason. Every single offseason, there's a string of high profile, big distraction transgressions by players. And that just makes the front office want to pull their hair out. It's like, guys, you got a lot of money. Just settle down, hunker down, and keep your head down. Like, stay out of trouble. That's the biggest worry of coaches, GMs, agents. You hate that 2 a.m. phone call. It's never for a good reason. they need to fortify their offensive line. They just lost an all-pro. They made a smart trade, but it was a big hole. And if you're talking about trying to galvanize the running game, if you're talking about trying to provide protection for Mahomes, you need to fortify the offensive line. They also need weapons. Travis Kelce's the big name, but he's starting to get up there. Wouldn't be a bad idea to add an extra tight end, start running double tight sets. But also, receivers are the cheetahs of the NFL, right? They're beautiful, they're fast, but it's like a Lamborghini when they break down, they're costly. So you can never have too much depth there either. Depth wins. The thing that most people don't realize is when it comes to the NFL is twofold. The average career is right around 3 years. So you come in at 21 and you're out before you're eligible to rent a car. Number two, the probability of injury is 100% in the NFL during the course of your career. The only question is severity. So when I say depth, that's what I'm referring to because guys go down. I've had guys break ankles, break arms, tear Achilles, which is the worst injury for an athlete, aside from a spinal. So guys are going to get hurt. You can never have too much depth in this game.
Yeah, no question about that. And I think that's where when you've got so much locked up in your quarterback, if you're not creative with your accounting, those dollars run out very quickly, right? As we've talked about. Philadelphia Eagles made all their great moves, obviously bringing in Saquon Barkley. Sorry, Giants, crying under beer every day. And Giants fans, it's same. Yeah. They signed him to the massive extension as well. I really think that because of what Saquon did with Philly, with what the Ravens did with Derrick Henry, that maybe now running backs will be valued again. We went through a period here where it was like, we'll just get some guy in the third round and plug him in for 3 years and we'll get somebody else. All of a sudden, that veteran running back who still has some legs, maybe you take a closer look at him and a second look and they're back to being valued again in the free agent market.
100%. And let's take those two cases separate. I used to rep the starting center for the New York Giants when Saquon was there. And he said he's the hardest worker on the team. He's also arguably the nicest guy. And so, it couldn't have happened to a harder working and a nicer guy. Not only the move unthinkably to a division rival, but, leading the league in rushing, winning a Super Bowl, getting the massive extension. That's very well deserved. And then Henry. I mean, this guy's an avatar. It looks like we built him in a lab. The guy is 30 years old, which is usually the cliff for NFL players, let alone running backs. That's like a Datsun with 400,000 miles on it, generally speaking. But Henry, there was a lot of press going into last season saying he spends $200,000 to $250,000 on his body in the offseason. You talk about a return on investment. But I do think we're going to see a return of the running back, not the big shoulder pads, Christian Okoye, 1980s era running back. But at some point, you have to take pressure off of your quarterback. This is a quarterback league, but in order for that quarterback to succeed, he has to have three things. He has to have an offensive line that protects him. He has to have a running back that can take pressure off of him. And he has to have targets, right, that make plays and move the ball down the field. And that's why we've really seen the emergence of the athletic tight end in recent years, because it takes the pressure off of the deep play. Because as much as the offense has advanced, so too has the defense. Most notably in the form of defensive ends. Howie Long was a beast, but Howie Long wasn't a 6'5", 260 run a 4.5 guy, right? And that's what you see in somebody like a Myles Garrett. I mean, they're just specimens. And so it puts tremendous pressure. Long-winded way of saying the relevance and reemergence of the running back is not a minute too soon for quarterbacks.
Yeah. Talking with Doug Eldridge, once again, founder of Achilles PR. You can see him pretty often on Fox Business as well, talking about sports issues. It is college basketball time as well. And on Sunday, we'll find out the 68 teams that get to be in the dance as we count down to San Antonio. The dollars of this as well. It's funny. We talk about the NFL and how it's recession proof. I mean, they're going to print money no matter what. The next biggest thing is the NCAA tournament that they're talking about expanding it, obviously for money. It feels almost inevitable because you will create more games and another window to sell more ads. And so it seems like we're heading there, but I hope that they do it whenever they do it, that it's an incremental growth. Don't jump to 96 teams all of a sudden. What's working right now? It's working. Let's try to keep this.
I agree with you. I mean, the NCAA, post the Supreme Court decision a couple of years ago, has really undergone a radical period of change. And it's been forced change. They didn't accede or otherwise agree to it. It was forced upon them. And I would argue it was a long time coming, but they're trying to figure their new revenue model. And to your point, their big revenue drivers, college football regular season, bowl game, and now the expanded national championship playoffs on the CFP, excuse me. I'm tired. But also in March Madness, they do $1 billion during March Madness alone.
Yeah.
To expand that and offset the increase in expenses and layouts that they're having to make in recent years, it only makes sense. But again, they're targeting advertisers, but who they need to keep for those advertisers to be relevant are the fans, the viewers. And it starts to lose its uniqueness, its specialness, if it bulges out to 96, to 128, to what have you. Like there has to be a certain parameter or it just becomes too big to control.
Yeah. And I think also, we were discussing this last week with our producer, Tony Cordero, that what do you remember about the NCAA tournament? Yeah, the champions. But aside from that, it's the little guy, it's the Cinderellas, right?
It comes out of nowhere every year, right? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
always.
It's San Diego State in the title game. It's Butler back-to-back title games. It's Valparaiso and Bryce Drew and the hook and ladder shot to beat Ole Miss. I mean, those are the moments. And so if you expand, you're not expanding with more little guys. You're expanding with more big guys with mediocre records that largely were unspectacular during the regular season. But now you're going to reward them by giving them a ticket to the dance that no one else wants in there anyway. So, but again, bigger conferences, I guess that's where we're headed.
But that was always the beauty of the NCAA tournament. It was the David killing the proverbial giant in an earlier mid round that nobody saw coming and put that university on the map. I was at George Mason Law School the year before George Mason made it to the Final Four, and the place went banana. And they were good in the 90s, but that put the school in many ways on the map. And you're right. If guilt by association is a thing, then benefit by membership is also a thing. So you're pulling mediocre teams from major conferences in lieu of that David with a sling and a rock that's just hungry to get in there and knock off Goliath.
Yeah, I've got a baseball question for you. I'll share one quick story. 2006, the year that George Mason made it and lost to Florida in the national semifinals. It's in Indianapolis at the old RCA Dome. My wife wanted a George Mason shirt. And all the Final Fours I've covered, all the major championships, Olympics, whatever. Never asked for a shirt, but she wants a George Mason shirt. I go into one tent, they were sold out. I go into the next tent, there were 5 shirts left. That's it. So I just grabbed the first one I found and, bought it and said, I don't know, whatever it costs, I'll just take it. But it was everyone was buying George Mason shirts, not UCLA, Florida, and LSU. And Florida didn't get there very often, neither does LSU. But it was George Mason. That was a big one. Major League Baseball, a lot of changes are coming up. ESPN getting kind of backing out of, they're not renewing their deal, whatever. Is there some real major problems here financially on the horizon? It just feels like we're headed toward a work stoppage or some kind of correction.
That's hard to answer. I mean, work stoppages happen literally in every sport when there's a standoff with the union and ownership. So that's inevitable. It's not a question of whether, but when. I think for Major League Baseball, the issue that they have to keep on the front burner is twofold. Number one, and they've done things like pitch clock and things like that to speed up the pace of the game. You have to lure the TV audience. But number two, I've coached my little boys' little league team. My son's, Alexander's 7 now. You have to engage the youth, right? So it's this simultaneous juggling act of keeping your current TV and in-game attendance, but also making sure you're doing the effort and the legwork to engage the next generation. For example, how many ads do we see from the NFL for flag football? Now that was done because not many people know this, but the reason that the NFL started initially it was pink, October Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and they expanded out to more of the rainbow in terms of the different ribbons for different types of cancer. The reason they did that is because they hired a focus group to go in a consulting firm. And the next generation of moms that were raising little boys, because of the data that was coming out about head injuries, they were very apprehensive about letting their son play growing up. Well, if a kid doesn't grow up playing football at a certain age, they're going to watch it less. If they watch it less, they're going to become adults that don't go and raise kids who don't go. So they saw a generational decline, eventually a cliff. And so talk about all-time brilliant PR, they started engaging the moms. And now they've gone clutch and accelerator, less focus on the breast cancer awareness and more flag football ads, little boys and little girls. And I said all that to say, where's the contrast for Major League Baseball? Where is the little league ads? Where's the have a catch with dad? We all remember that tagline from Field of Dreams. Hey, dad, want to have a catch? I still get a lump in my throat, And so to your point, their problem really is twofold. All right, if we're losing ESPN as a broadcast partner, how do we engage our regional markets, right? How do we drum up interest prior to the World Series? But in that same breath, how do we make sure that we're drilling down and tapping into that next generation of talent that wasn't even raised on SportsCenter? I think SportsCenter did damage to the patience for the game. It's not a 30-minute episode of SportsCenter. It's a 30-second clip on TikTok. And so if the attention span and with it the interest is getting shorter and shorter and shorter, MLB has to figure that out because the media is in the atmosphere. They don't want to be the dinosaurs.
Yeah, well said. And we've seen that in the NBA and WNBA, how they've, going after the youth market in that. Exactly. Doug, we'll leave it there. My friend, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for your time, and hopefully we'll catch up soon.
Man, it's always great to see you. And stop being so modest. I don't know how many of your listeners know about your magic formula for March Madness. You need to because your record is eerie.
Next Tuesday, be here for the 15th annual Dirty Dozen. We'll unveil it here on the show. So thanks. By the way, folks, that was unsolicited. Doug did that on the.
I'm going to start calling you for lotto numbers, my friend.
All right. Thanks so much, Doug Eldridge.
Good to see you.
Good to see you, brother. Founder of Achilles PR. Be sure to give him a follow on social media. We've got more to come right here on the Sports IQ with Larry Smith.